وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعد نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إلى علمنا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Inshallah, we'll continue with reading the book known as al-Awsat fi al-Sunani wal-Ijma'i wal-Ikhtilaf li Abi Bakr Muhammad ibn Ibrahim ibn al-Mundhir rahimahullah ta'ala rahmatan wasi'ah, who died in the year 318 after the Hijrah. And we're in the section of his book, Kitaab al-Miyaah, the section that deals with the different categories of water. And the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, in the recent chapters, he's been mentioning those circumstances that can be confusing as it relates to the water. Is the water najis? Is it clean? Is the substance that was made using the water najis, or is it clean? If something najis falls into the water, does it contaminate it or not? We see this kind of theme of ideas that aren't necessarily directly related to the water, but around the suitability or usability of the water based on the circumstances because of this disagreement and because of this unsurety that we experience or that we find ourselves in regarding the condition of the water when it's a small amount and it comes into contact with contaminants of najasa. And so now the author, he has a chapter in front of us. He has the chapter في أحد في ذكر الإناءين يسقط في أحدهما نجاسة ثم يشكل ذلك. What has been mentioned regarding two containers where something najis falls into one of them, and then it is unclear, or it is unclear which one it fell into. You have two containers, something najis falls into one of them, and then it becomes problematic to distinguish which container had the najis substance in it. And as we mentioned in previous chapters, this is only applicable if you hold the view that water becomes najis if it's a small amount simply by coming into contact with something najis. Because this is the way that it would be unclear and problematic distinguishing one from the other. And this is something that, it can happen often and normal. We're going to see in the next chapter, different circumstances of how this could be. For example, you might have a dog or a pet, and that pet might be an animal that is najis, like a dog or like a bird. Or you might have something where you leave a container of water out, and we'll talk about a cat later. But you might leave a container of water out, and then a dog licks in it, or something falls into it. You might have been burning something, and the smoke of that item that you were burning might have gotten into the water. And all of these are circumstances where some of the people of knowledge would deem that water to be najis. But the problem comes where the water itself hasn't changed. And maybe you have multiple cups that all resemble each other. Maybe, for example, another practical example of this, a mother changing her child's diaper and maybe gets some of the fecal matter or the urine on her hand. And instead of going to wash her hands in the sink or something like that, she's in the middle of doing something. So she just dips her finger into the cup and scrubs her finger off in the water that's in the cup. But the water, it wasn't a large amount, so the water doesn't change its taste, color, or smell. And then later on, since the cups in the home were part of a set, somebody else leaves their cup out and it has water in it. And now they don't know, was this your cup that you cleaned your fingers off in, or was this the cup of water I was drinking out of? And so now you have two containers where something najis has gotten into one of them and you are unsure, it is unclear which one of the two the najis substance has gotten into. How do you act in this circumstance, specifically as it relates to wudu? And the scholars, they often bring this issue up in the books of Islamic law in the chapter of water. Even though it's suitable to be mentioned in the topic of containers, they bring it up in the topic of water because the issue is, how should I go about making wudu in this situation? Should I make wudu from both of them? Should I leave both of them and make tayammum? Should I try to figure out which one I think is the impermissible one? If you say I should make wudu from both of them, should I pray two different salats? And so I make wudu from one, then pray, then make wudu from the other and pray. Or should I just make wudu one and one, right? Like you would do with tahir water, if you hold that view. Likewise, if you say I should pour them out, if I should make tayammum, do you stipulate that I have to pour them out? Or can I leave them so that somebody else who might know the difference between them can benefit from them? Likewise, do I need to tell anybody about the circumstance of the water? Do I have to make it known to other people that, one of these containers, something najis has gotten into? And they also equate to this topic the issue of if the same thing happens to your clothing. If you get najasa on your clothing and it becomes unclear which garment has the najasa on it. Maybe you wiped some urine off of yourself. You couldn't find any tissue or stones. And so you used the edge of your garment to wipe yourself. And when you got home, you threw it in the dirty clothes. But laundry day didn't happen. You didn't wash your clothes yet. And now you need to wear a thobe or something to make salat. And you have a thobe that's brown and another thobe that's brown that you can't tell the difference. Which one did I wipe, the urine with, the edge of my sleeve or the edge of my thobe? Or if a dog, licked you, or if, you had akramakumullah, flatulence with some, moisture in it and some substance in it, but now you can't see the effects of it. All of these topics are connected to this issue. And so we see that this issue is one that has a lot of value in it as it relates to understanding some of our day-to-day routine in the affair of purification, specifically as it deals with the water. And so that's this chapter. ذِكْرُ الْإِنَاءَيْنِ يَسْقُطُ فِي أَحَدِهِمَا نَجَاسَةٌ ثُمَّ يُشْكِلُ ذَلِكَ. What has been mentioned regarding two containers, something najis falling into one of them, and then it becoming problematic to decipher that. Ibn al-Mundhir rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, اختلف أهل العلم في الإناءين يسقط في أحدهما نجاسة ثم يشكل ذلك فقالت طائفة يتوضأ بالأغلب منهما أنه طاهر عنده هذا قول الشافعي. So this is the first view, right? We mentioned some of the different statements in brevity, but here's the first view. Ibn al-Mundhir, he says, the people of knowledge differ regarding the condition or the circumstance of two containers where something najis falls into one of them. And then it becomes problematic or difficult to decipher that or to distinguish which one from the other. And so he says that some of the people of knowledge, they say that the person should make wudu with whichever one he feels stronger that it is the pure water in his belief. He should make wudu with whichever one he feels stronger is the pure water in his assumption or his belief. He says, and this is the statement of a Shafi'i. He tries his hardest to figure out which one is the cleaner one, and he just uses that. And as we mentioned, this is only in the circumstance where the water's taste, color, or smell has not changed. And that's why it's problematic. And in reality, this statement from a Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, is what they call like a using a person's opinion against them. Because a Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, as we mentioned before, he holds the view that water becomes najis by simply coming into contact with something najis if it's a small amount. But if the water is najis, then how could you tell a person to use it? While in this opinion, a Shafi'i is telling a person, since you don't know which one is which, just use whichever one you think is pure, even though the possibility exists that it is najis in his opinion. And so for that reason, we find that this can be used as an evidence to refute those who hold the view that najis water or water becomes najis by simply coming into contact. Because even those who state such an opinion allow the possibility of using it without any repercussion, i.e. in this example, a Shafi'i. But it's clear why a Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, allows it, because the reality of it is that there's no traces of the najasa. And so in this circumstance, it's hard on us to obligate you to do something where there's no evidence for its obligation, and to put you in a difficulty of making two salat or making two wudu, or to put you in a difficulty of having to waste the water. All of these things become problematic in the religion, burdening a person with doing something that there's no evidence for. And when we say burdening a person, right, a person has to understand the reality of these statements. A taklif or al-ijab, these are statements where, somebody might say, no, it's no hardship, it's no burden, I can do it. But we don't mean burden just in the sense of difficulty per se. We mean that you have a freedom naturally from being obliged to do something. Bara'atul asliyah, right? A person by default is not obligated to do something. And so to obligate someone to do something is considered in the religion taklif. It's considered burdening them, giving them the responsibility of having to do an action. And so it doesn't just always mean, extreme difficulty or hardship. It just means, can you make somebody do something? And these concepts in the religion, they should always be paid attention to, like the religious realities of things, because they help a person gauge fairly circumstances. Like when you talk about something like getting a ride from someone, right? You're for example, my children, they work, alhamdulillah, but they need rides to get back and forth to work. Is it permissible for me to charge them? Right? And a person might say, oh, well, how can you charge your children? You're taking them back and forth to work. This is something you're helping them learn. This is a parent's responsibility. But the reality of it is that no, it's not. It's not my responsibility. Right? And don't worry, I take my children to work. But the point of it is that it's not my responsibility, because they have the ability to earn, and me having to drive them to do such a thing is a burden. It's a taklif. It's giving me a responsibility. And that responsibility is something that entitles compensation. And so when we talk about, for example, a more practical religious scenario, breastfeeding, is a mother obligated to breastfeed her child? And the answer is no, because it's not her job to feed the child when the father has the means to do so. And so for this reason, if the mother is to breastfeed the child, she's to be compensated by the father. And if he doesn't want to compensate her, then he can go and seek someone else and have them breastfeed the child. Or he can go buy Similac nowadays or things like that, if the mother refuses to do it for the amount that he's offering. And so, like, understanding these things, they help a person have a sense of fairness, that you can't burden somebody with something. You can't force somebody to do something. Well, that's in the favor of the woman, the mother. What about in favor of the husband? Does the husband have to, for example, pay the medical bills of the wife? Right? If she gets sick, does he have to uh, uh, take her to the doctor? Does he have to take her to Hajj? Does he have to pay for her to have a car or a phone or things of this nature? And the default position in this, a lot of scholars would hold that no, this is not necessary because that is not the right of the wife over the husband. And so the point of all of this isn't for us to be, nitpicking and petty in how we itemize our transactions with our loved ones, but it's to help us appreciate that this responsibility is not something that is inherent on me. And so it also helps us to not feel entitled to that which is with others. And it also has a bearing on certain religious aspects. When we talk about getting a loan, right? You can't get a loan, or should I say, you can't give a loan that brings you back a benefit in addition to the repayment. So, like for example, if somebody asked me, Abdul Hakim, let me borrow $100, and I say, yeah, I'll loan you $100, but you have to drive me to my mother's house. Them driving me to my mother's house isn't something I'm entitled to. That is a burden. That is a responsibility that I'm placing on them, which is a benefit that entitles them to compensation. They're now an Uber. They're now a taxi. And so me loaning them $100 with the condition that they drive me to my mother's house, then this is something that is a loan that's bringing back a benefit. And if it wasn't from our relationship that we would give each other rides for free, then I can't accept this ride as a stipulation of the loan. And all of these issues, all of it in a nutshell is that the foundation is bara'atul asliyah, a freedom from responsibility, and that there's no responsibility except that which has been legislated. And so here in this issue, it's hard for a Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, to obligate a person to make 2 salats. Where has Allah obligated somebody to make 2 wudus and 2 salats? And where has Allah obligated somebody to have to pour out their property, their water? This is wealth. This is a portion of wealth. Where has Allah obligated upon us to make them pour it out? And so for that reason, this is some of the logic and the reasoning that is used by a Shafi'i and those who hold this view to say, just try to figure out which one is more likely the clean water, because it's too hard for us to put this responsibility on you, especially in this issue that's disagreeable. And like we said, the stronger opinion perhaps is that there's no necessity of doing any of this because all of the water is still clean. But because of all of these reasonings, Shafi'i, in his opinion, would say just use whatever water is more likely pure in your assumption. So that's the first opinion and some of its reasoning. The second opinion, he says, وقالت الطائفة في البول يقع في إحدى جرتين لا يتوضأ بواحدة. هذا قول أحمد، وكذلك قول أبو ثور، وقال يتيمم، وكان المزني يقول لا يتوضأ بأحد الإناءين. قال ولو جاز أن يتوضأ بأحدهما لجاز أن يشرب منه، ولجاز أن يؤكل بالتحري أحد البضعتين. طبخت إحداهما بنجس والأخرى بماء طاهر، ويطأ إحدى امرأتين مطلقة وغير مطلقة، ويبيع أحد غلامين معتق وعبد. The second opinion is an opinion that makes more sense, but is problematic from the aspect of what it requires on a person. And it's giving that person added responsibility. So even though Shafi'i's opinion, just figure out which one you think and use that one, is lesser in its burdening upon the person, it doesn't line up with the reasoning and the principles the way that it should. Excuse me. This second opinion lines up with the reasoning and the principles in the way that it should, but it's stronger or it's more abundant and it's burdening on the person. So what do they say? Ibn al-Mundhir, he says, a group of scholars say regarding urine that falls into one of the two jugs. And the reason he specifies urine here is to include Imam Ahmed. Because Imam Ahmed, there are various statements of his. Is it all najasa, or is it only urine and liquid fecal matter that automatically contaminate the water? And so he's just being general or specific in his mentioning of this to include Imam Ahmed in all of his statements. And if not, then the statement is general if you hold the view that water becomes najis by contact. So he says that, and a group of them say that regarding urine that falls into one of the jugs, you should not make wudu with either one of them. Right? You can't choose. You can't make wudu with either one. He says, and this is the statement of Ahmed, as well as the statement of Abu Thawr, and they say that you should make tayammum. They say that you should make tayammum because you don't know which water is clean and which water is najis. And so to use a water that is najis willingly would be against the principles. And to allow you to choose where the possibility exists that the water that you're going to use is najis doesn't line up with reasoning. So they say you should make tayammum because here you're having water is the same as if you don't have water. Even though you have clean water, since you don't know which one it is, then you are the same as one who doesn't have clean water. And obviously, this is in a circumstance where there's no other water available, right? When you are in this situation and there's no other water available. Ibn al-Mundhir, he says, وَكَانَ الْمُزَنِي. And al-Muzani, rahimahullah ta'ala, was from the students of Imam al-Shafi'i. So this is something that he disagreed with his teacher in, right? And so he holds the opinion different than al-Shafi'i in this topic. He says that al-Muzani, he used to say, you should not make wudu with any water out of either of the two containers. And he says his reasoning behind that, he says, and this is because if it was permissible to make wudu with one of the waters, not knowing which water was which, it would have been permissible to drink from either of the waters, not knowing which water was which. And it would have been permissible to eat by tahari, right? It would have been permissible for you to try to figure out which one was clean and which one was dirty, and then eat whichever one you assumed from the morsels of food that have been cooked using this najis water. Where one of them was cooked with najis and the other one was cooked with something pure. It would have been permissible for you to eat either one of the foods that, or either one of the morsels that was prepared, one of them cooked with this najis substance and one of them cooked with the pure substance. So like, for example, if this was the case, and nowadays we eat like it here during the summer, and you have the street vendors and they have the barbecue pits, and they have the grills where they're cooking the pork, and you have the grills where they're cooking the chicken, for example. And some grills, they don't do either one. Some of them they mix it up. But if it was permissible for you to make wudu with either one of these waters, it would have been permissible for you to eat from either one of these grills. Like there's a restaurant here that, they smoke their food, and sometimes the juices from the pig fall onto the other meats, adding flavor to it. And sometimes it doesn't. And you're unsure, right? If you get there early in the morning where they haven't cooked any pork, they haven't gotten busy, the chicken is still good because they haven't cooked any pork on that skewer yet, or on that grill yet, or on that smoker yet. But if you get there later in the day or after they've been busy and they've just started mixing and matching to cook to get the orders met, then now you have the problem. Is this chicken, was it contaminated by the pork juices? And so al-Muzani is saying if it was permissible for you to make wudu with either one of those waters by guessing or by assuming, which one you think is most likely the case, then it would have been permissible for you to eat from meat like this. And we know the foundation in meat is that you can't eat it until you know that it's permissible, right? The foundation in meat is prohibition until you know that it's permissible. والأصل في الضاء واللحوم والنفس والأموال للمعصوم تحريمه حتى يجيء حل فافهم هداك الله ما يمل. As the Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, and the foundation in private parts and in meat and in life and in wealth is the prohibition until it comes that which makes it permissible. So pay attention. May Allah guide you to understanding what is being dictated. So this is what al-Muzani is saying. He also says, even in a more clear circumstance, if you had the option to choose between which one based on your assumption of what is most likely the case, it would have been permissible for you to have intercourse with either of the two women, the one that you've already divorced and the one that you hadn't divorced. So, for example, this scenario can happen sometimes. A man says, whichever one of my wives leaves the house is divorced. Or whichever one of my wives leaves the house first, then she's divorced. Whichever one of my wives leave their house first, she's divorced. And then you don't know which one left first, right? They both went out that day, but you don't know which one left first. And so now you're in a problem because who is still your wife and who's not? If you use the reasoning of Shafi'i to say, well, you can try to figure out whichever one you assume is the permissible one and you can, keep that one, then we would have said that you can do the same thing as it relates to these two women who the possibility of divorce exists on them. And we don't say that, right? There's a whole different scenario about what you have to do in this circumstance because now you don't know what private part is halal and what private part is haram. And so this is the logic that Muzani is using. Likewise, he says, or you would have been able to say it's regarding the young boys that you sold, right? If you had two slave boys and you freed one of them and the other one you didn't free, but then you got confused about which one you freed and which one you didn't, we would have said it's okay for you to sell whichever one you think. But that's not possible. You can't sell a free person. So you can't say I'm gonna sell whichever one I think, because the possibility of one of them still being, or one of them now actually being free, invalidates the sale of that individual as a slave. And so this is the logic that Muzani is using. Now, this aligns with reasoning and logic, although there is a retort that can be given. And that retort is that as far as the foundation of water, then its foundation is permissibility. And so water remains permissible until proven that it's not. And here, the suspicion does not remove the permissibility because certainty is not removed by doubt. While in the examples that al-Muzani is bringing, as it relates to the meat, as it relates to the intercourse, as it relates to selling of the slave that you're in doubt about, the foundation in all of those things is prohibition. And so it does not become permissible until you're sure. And this is that principle that certainty is not removed by doubt. So whichever circumstance you're sure about, then that is the case until you have an evidence to remove you from that. And so one could make the argument that there's a difference between the usage of the water in this circumstance by with reasonable doubt, or as long as there's no, with the predominant of suspicion, what do they call it? A predominance of assumption, a presumption of assumption, or of dominance in that sake. There's a difference between water and the things that al-Muzani mentions because the foundations are different. And you should always work according to the foundation. So this is an argument that can be made to support the Shafi'i view over the Hanabila and those who hold their view, like Abu Thawr and even Muzani, because one can argue the difference in origin, where water, its origin is permissible, likewise containers and things of that nature, while meat and intercourse and things like that, the origin is impermissibility. And so, these are both of their arguments. And as we said, position one and position two, they only are relevant if you say that water becomes najis by coming into contact with something that is najis if it's a small amount. And those of us who don't hold that view, then we have, no dog in this fight, and we're not bound to this issue. We just exit the issue, and instead we use both sides of this argument against the other, right? And all of the arguments that both of them use against each other, we add it to our repertoire, and we say, in addition to all of our proofs, you have all of these proofs that you're arguing each other with. It would have been easier for you to just take our opinion. And not that ease is the case, but meaning the evidence is stronger in our side because there's no argument against it. Hakada. And for that reason, the author, he says, وَفِيهِ قَوْلٌ ثَالِث. In this topic, there is a third opinion. He says, قاله عبد الملك الماجشون قال يتوضأ بأحدهما ثم يصلي ثم يتوضأ بالآخر ثم يصلي وهكذا مذهب محمد بن مسلمة غير أنه قال يغسل بالذي يلي الأولى ما أصابه من الأول. Like we mentioned, there's another opinion in this, right? So you got use whichever one you think is pure. We got don't use either, make tayammum. And then we have the third opinion, which is, he says, it is the statement that was said by Abdul Malik al-Majishun, right? From the Atba' al-Tabi'in, if I'm not mistaken, from the scholars of Medina, if I'm not mistaken. He says, you should make wudu with one of them and then pray. You should make wudu with one of them and then pray. And then you should make wudu with the other and then pray again. Because if you do it this way, then you're certain that you have prayed a salat that is correct with a wudu that is correct. Was it the first one or the second one? You don't know. But you know that if the first one was good, then it was accepted. And if the first one was with the najis water, then by remaking the wudu and re-praying, the second one was accepted. And so you know you've completed the salat. And so although this combines between all of the positions and you accomplish certainty in this matter, we still run into that issue that we talked about before about overburdening a person. And do we have the right to make it obligatory on somebody to pray two salat when there's no evidence that they need to pray two salat, right? Making tayammum would make more sense logically and reasonably, but to escape the argument of, well, do you actually have water and how can you make tayammum if water is actually available to you? This is why they say this position of pray twice, because that's the only way to know that you prayed for sure correctly. And this is something that the Salaf would do. They didn't find it, some of them, to be a difficulty to pray, right? And they even though we just had the whole conversation about when we talk about burden and responsibility, it's not about it being difficult, because praying to them was so easy and so enjoyable and such an enjoyment and a delight. It wasn't hard for them to pray twice. They would rather pray twice and know that one of them was correct than to pray once with the possibility of it not being correct, even with the knowledge that Allah might accept it, because they did their best. They would rather know that they've accomplished their responsibility. So they took their responsibilities more seriously, even if that's not something that's necessary. And this is a quality of the Salaf that should be in the Salafi. Because a lot of times, and I'm from the worst of them, our education and our information, and Ibn Taymiyyah talks about this in Iqtida Sirat al-Mustaqim, the people of tafaqquh, of intellect and understanding, you can find them being laxed in actions because they know the exceptions. Right? I remember our first day in the university when we were in the Arabic program, and I remember our teacher. He told us, he said, "You all, as students of knowledge, are on the border of the hellfire. You're on the edge of the hellfire." Because this knowledge, it can make you find what they can consider like loopholes in the religion and ways out to escape your responsibility. And knowledge should never be used for that purpose. Knowledge should be used, the purpose of knowledge is to act. And so it's unfortunate that we see a lot of times that we use knowledge to get out of doing the action. Oh, I know the reality in this issue. It's not necessary. It's not wajib, or, I have an excuse here. I have an excuse there. And so we ask Allah for actions, beneficial knowledge, and righteous actions. But this is the point that the Salaf, they used to be like this. Hamza, Abu Zayyat, not Abu Zayyat. Is it Abu Zayyat? The famous Qari, Hamza, Abu Zayyat. Hamza al-Zayyat. Hamza al-Zayyat. The famous Qari Hamza al-Zayyat, the one who has that well-known recitation, Khalif and Hamza, right? He was an individual from the scholars of Kufa, of Quran. And the people of Kufa, they used to have the view that it was permissible to drink wine. This was a popular opinion of theirs, that it was permissible to drink wine. So for 40 years, he engaged in the drinking of wine. Scholar of Quran, Qari. His qira'ah is one of the 10 unanimously agreed, undeniable modes of reciting the Quran. For 40 years, he held the opinion that it was permissible to drink wine. And then his opinion changed to it being impermissible. And so they mention about him that he made up 40 years of salah. Right? While us, if somebody said, for 40 years, I was, making wudu wrong, or I was praying incorrectly, I used to, not do this, or I used to make wudu and I would only wipe over my bare feet, something like this, we would say to them, inshallah, it was ignorance, just fix it from now. But the Salaf, you found from them those who took their responsibility seriously. And so he made up 40 years of salah. And so the point is that you had people like this from the Salaf, and this is what would lead them to this type of position of Abdul Malik ibn Majishun, where they would say that you need to pray twice. Make wudu with the first water, then pray. And if that was good, then it's good. And then what you do afterwards means nothing. Or if the first one was invalid, then what you do with the second one is the one that is good, and the first one meant nothing. But there's a problem with that, and that is, well, if the first one you made was with the Najis water, then your body is now contaminated. And for that reason, he says, this is the madhab of Muhammad ibn Maslama. Except that Muhammad ibn Maslama, he also added that you need to wash away the traces of the first water with the second water. Because it's not enough to just make wudu again. You have to make sure that whatever parts of your body or clothing the first water touched, you need to wash that away with the second water in case the first water was najis. You have to clean those areas. And so this is the third opinion. This is the third opinion. He mentions a fourth opinion in this issue. He says, وَقَالَ الطَّائِفَةِ إِذَا لَمْ يَتَعَيَّنْ وَاحِدٌ مِنَ الْإِنَاءَيْنِ تطهر بهما وبكل واحد منهما لأن الماء لا ينجسه شيء. هذا مذهب عبد الرحمن بن مهدي ويحيى القطان. قال أبو بكر هذا قول يصح في النظر والله أعلم. The fourth opinion is the opinion that we lean to, which is, he says, and a group of scholars say that if it's not clear, if it's not specifically clear which of the two containers, i.e. has the pure water, then he can make wudu from either one of the two. تطهر بهما. He can make wudu with either one of the two, and or with both of them, or from either one of them, should I say. He can make wudu from both of them or from either one of them. And this is because nothing makes water in najis. Nothing makes water najis. This is the madhab of Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi and Yahya al-Qattan, and Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan. Abu Bakr ibn al-Mundhir, he says, and this statement is the one that is valid in the scales of reasoning, and Allah knows best. Right? If you don't know which water is which, that means that both the waters are the same. There's nothing there to distinguish them. That means they're undistinguishable or indistinguishable. So you can make wudu from both of them. You can use some of this water and some of that water, or you can make wudu from either one of them, because all water is tahor. Nothing makes it najis. The hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the only exception to that would be water that is agreed upon unanimously that it's najis, and that is water that its taste, color, or smell has changed. And he says that this is the view of Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi and Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan. And these are two of the scholars of the Atba' al-Tabi'in. And Abu Bakr ibn al-Mundhir, he says, and this statement is the one that is more valid according to the scales of reasoning, or according to reasoning, or accurate reasoning or logic. And Allah knows best. Meaning it's more valid in logic for two reasons. One, it makes more sense with the text. And so our logic is always secondary to the text. When we look at the text supports this reasoning, and so it makes more sense, right? The second reason why it makes more sense is it makes more sense in pure logic as well. And that is, a judgment is given based on the condition that something is in. Or as we say in usul al-illa, al-hukm taduru ma illatihi wujudan wa adama. The ruling revolves around the reason for its existence and its absence. And in this water, or this case where there's two containers with water that are indecipherable, then there is no justification for us to differentiate between the two of them. And so why would we? And why would we do all of these things that these other scholars are mentioning, of making you make two wudus, or making you make a tayammum, or making you choose one over the other? La ya akhi, just make wudu. Allah says, فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً فَتَيَمَّمُوا. If you don't find any water, and you found water, and there's no reason why this water would be unusable. And the argument that is made by al-Muzani that, well, it would be like making the two private parts permissible, or the two morsels of meat permissible, we say no, there's still that difference, that water is pure until it becomes najis. And you have to have a proof to make it najis, and you have no such proof here. While the private parts, the freed slave, the morsels of meat, they are haram until they're proven halal. And in that doubt, you don't have a proof to make them halal. So this is that chapter. I hope there was some clarification in that. Like I say, this is one of the interesting issues. They usually attach it to the book of Niyat and the books of fiqh. And so you can find it mentioned there. The next chapter that we'll cover will be similar to this, with a little twist and caveat. He says, ذِكْرُ مَا لَا يَنْجُسُ الْمَاءِ مِنَ الْهَوَامِ وَمَا أَشْبَهَهَا مِمَّا لَا نَفْسَ لَهُ سَائِلٌ أو سَائِلَةٌ. The chapter regarding mentioning, or what has been mentioned regarding which animals don't make the water najis. Which, beasts, which animals don't make the water najis, and likewise what are similar to them from those insects or those bugs that don't have flowing blood. Which animals, and likewise that which resembles them from the insects that don't have flowing blood, don't make the water najis. If they fall into the water, or if they drink out of the water, or if part of their body or being gets into the water, which animals and insects don't contaminate the water? That will be the next chapter. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.